Hare Krishna, everybody. This is Krishna Dasa, and I welcome you all to today's session of the Pragmatic Bhagavad Gita. Today, we're going to cover chapter 1. But before we start, let us say the prayer to Guru and God. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakya Chakshuram Militamena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namah. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So chapter 1 is called Arjuna Vishada Yoga, and it sets the stage for Shri Krishna to expound the divine knowledge of Bhagavad Gita. So we will summarize this chapter and the key lessons learned from it, and from chapter 2 onwards, we will review each shloka and explain the practical lessons contained in them. Now, Vishada is a state of sorrow and despair. It is the state of mind of Arjuna when he was standing in the middle of the battleground known as the Kurukṣetra. In fact, for most humans, they seek higher spiritual knowledge only when they are in the state of Vishada. Thus, Arjuna's state of mind being in this state at the beginning of the war is very symbolic for all of humanity. As discussed in the introduction to Bhagavad Gita, I hope you all remember the great battle of Mahabharata. It happened between Pandavas and Kauravas almost 5,000 years ago at the least, where the Pandavas were the 5 princes whose father was the late king Pandu, while the Kauravas were 100 princes whose father was the blind king Drtharashtra. The battlefield where the great war of Mahabharata occurred is called Kurukṣetra. It is also referred to as dharmakṣetra. So dharma means righteousness and kṣetra means the field. So this is the field where the war for righteousness happened. As beautifully quoted by Swami Vivekananda, the Kauravas had the might, but the Pandavas had the right. Before the war, Lord Shri Krishna gave the choice to both the sides, for Kauravas as well as Pandavas, to either choose just him or choose his vast army. Now, Krishna really had a very vast and strong army. Duryodhana, the eldest prince of the Kauravas, was greedy and short-sighted, and he chose to have Krishna's vast army, whereas the Pandavas gracefully and gratefully chose Lord Krishna himself, even though Krishna said that he will only act as a guide and not use any weapons or not participate actively in the war. Now, this is kind of symbolic for all of humanity again. Sometimes we may feel that the adharmic side is very strong and very powerful, but we shouldn't fear. As long as we are on the side of Dharma, we should know that Krishna is with us and ultimate victory is going to be ours. Now, the happenings in the battlefield, including the discourse of Bhagavad Gita by Lord Krishna, is conveyed to the world through a dialogue between King Drtharashtra and his minister Sanjaya. Drtharashtra was blind, although he was very eager to know what was happening in the battlefield. Sanjaya was a minister and he was also a disciple of sage Ved Vyas, who was the author of the epic Mahabharata. And he had received from Ved Vyas the miraculous power of distant vision. Therefore, Sanjaya could see and hear everything that was happening on the battleground while being seated next to the king in his palace. So he was giving a running commentary to King Drtharashtra. So the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita begins with Dhritarashtra's query to Sanjaya. Dhritarashtra uvacha dharmakṣetre kurukshetre samaveta yujutsavah mamakaha pandavaschaiva kimakuruvat Sanjaya. O Sanjaya, after they gathered on the holy field of Kurukṣetra, being eager for battle, what did my sons and Pandavas do? Now verses 2 to 20, they provide an introduction to all the great warriors from both sides and how they were blowing their conches and showing up their strength and so on and so forth. Verses 21 to 24, they describe the scene where Arjuna requests Shri Krishna to to take their chariot to the middle of the battleground in between both armies. It starts with Arjuna saying, I think Anika ji would like to recite verses 21 and 22.
Arjuna uvacha senayorpayormadhye ratham stapayamechyuta yavadeta niriksheham yutto kaman avasthitan kairmaya saha yuttavyam asmin rana samutyame.
O infallible one, please draw my chariot between the two armies so that I can see those present there, those who desire to fight and with whom I must fight in this great battle. Through verses 25 to 47, Arjuna's state of mind being full of sorrow and anxiety, and how he was experiencing a nervous breakdown, and how he was refusing to fight this battle of righteousness, all this is covered. Now, there is a term called dark night of the soul. Arjuna was going through this particular dark night of the soul. The term originated from a poem by the 16th century Spanish mystic and poet Saint John of the Cross. The poem describes a difficult spiritual period that one goes through on the journey towards union with God, where the soul experiences a sense of emptiness, isolation, and spiritual desolation. The term is often used to describe a period of spiritual crisis. Usually, in this situation, an individual feels like there is no purpose or meaning in life. They can feel despair, confusion, sense of being lost. This can also be accompanied by a feeling like as if God has abandoned us. But this feeling can be overwhelming, and it can create a sense of alienation and isolation. I'm sure many of us in this group, we have felt it at some point in our lives. Now, we should understand that the dark night of the soul is a necessary and transformative process for spiritual development and evolution. During this period, the individual's attachment to the material world is weakened, and a deeper connection to the spiritual world is established. Many years ago, I attended a lecture by Deepak Chopra. He's a very famous spiritualist. He's also one of the top medical professionals in the world. So he was in this lecture, he was trying to explain about consciousness. And one very interesting thing he said was, we all know, we believe and we also know that whatever we are physically is determined by our DNA. Now, science accepts this as a fact. And then he says, if you compare a human DNA with a banana's DNA, you will see that there is 95% commonality. In other words, 95% of our DNA is the same as a banana. But we certainly don't feel like 95% banana, right? Likewise, he says that if we compare our DNA with some chimpanzees, almost 99% would be similar. But we certainly don't feel 99% a monkey. In other words, what he was trying to prove, or what he was trying to explain, was this notion of evolution. What makes us feel human is not as much physical, because in the physical realm, we are still 95% banana and 99% chimpanzee. So what makes us human is a lot non-physical than just physical. That is why it is important to understand spiritual concepts and aim for spiritual growth, because spiritual evolution is the real true evolution that keeps making us better and better human beings. So if any of us have gone through, or if any of us are still going through this phase of life which is termed as the dark night of the soul, the good news is whenever we go through this phase, we should know that we are getting ready and preparing ourselves for something higher. The world famous author Paulo Coelho, who is known for masterpieces like The Alchemist, he quotes the story of a boy who witnesses a butterfly struggling to free itself from a cocoon. As most of you know, a butterfly is inside a cocoon, and it becomes a butterfly only after it gets out of that cocoon. So this boy is witnessing this butterfly struggling to get out of the cocoon, and he feels bad for the butterfly. So he says, I think I should try help this butterfly. So he goes, takes out his pocket knife, cuts open the cocoon and frees the butterfly. But alas, he sees that the butterfly comes out with small and weak wings. It's not able to fly. It falls down and very soon it dies. The key point is that struggle to get out of the cocoon, that is what provides the strength to the wings of the butterfly and helps develop the wings. Just like that, when we go through dark night of the soul, it is there for a purpose. It's not a punishment. It is there to help us get stronger. It is there to help us with our spiritual evolution. This is the message conveyed through Arjuna's state, a state of Vishada for all of humanity. Now there are various names for Krishna as well as Arjuna. Here Arjuna addresses Krishna as Govinda. Krishna has different names and so does Arjuna. Throughout the Bhagavad Gita, both Krishna and Arjuna, they will address each other by different names. No, it's not just a random choice of names that they choose. Instead, they choose it very intentionally based on the context and the situation. In the current context, Arjuna is in a state of misery and his senses are overwhelmed. So he addresses Krishna as Govinda, which means he who gives pleasure to the senses. Arjuna expects Krishna to please his senses by just sharing his sorrow and talking words of consolation. What we need to understand is, although God is always happy to please his devotees, the lesson to learn here is that we should always strive to please God. In turn, all our senses would automatically get pleased. It's just like a child who has many wants. And instead of keeping on demanding what I want this, I want that, if the child instead focuses on pleasing their parents, the parents would automatically provide the child with whatever it needs. In verses 36 through 42, it becomes evident that Arjuna does not yet understand that he is fighting for Dharma. He thinks he is on the battlefield only for a political battle and for material gains. And he thinks he will incur great sins for killing all these people in the battlefield. Here he is addressing Krishna as Madhava, which means husband of the goddess of fortune. So just by addressing Krishna thus, he is telling Krishna that, hey Krishna, you are the husband of goddess of good fortune. How can you let me do something which will bring me misfortune? See, apart from not understanding the purpose of this war, Arjuna also does not yet understand that Krishna can never bring misfortune to anybody, let alone his own devotees. So Arjuna makes a lot of excuses. Through verse 28 to 45, he starts quoting various scriptures to justify his views. This is the classic demonstration of weakness of heart. Whenever we catch ourselves justifying our opinions, we should introspect whether we are having clarity of thought or if we are acting just out of fear and weakness of heart. This is very important because many times we justify our opinions only because we are afraid. We are afraid of being proven wrong, or we are afraid we will lose something if our opinion is proved to be wrong. Arjuna also tries to hide his weakness of heart under the guise of non-violence. That's one of the biggest excuses he tries to make on the battlefield. However, Krishna would go on to explain that non-violence is a virtue only if it comes from a position of strength. Cowardice is not the same as non-violence. I hope it makes sense, I mean, imagine a very weak person, a person who is so weak he can hardly stand, and his opponent is 20, 30 times stronger than him. And this person tells the stronger person, hey, I'm not going to hit you because I believe in non-violence. I mean, so absurd. I mean, he can't hit him even if he wants to. So there it is not non-violence, there it is just fear. He's just afraid. So that is more like cowardice. He just didn't have a choice, But sometimes you may be strong, but you still don't want to do anything just because you are afraid. You have so much fear within you. That is classic cowardice. So Krishna goes on to say that cowardice is not the same as non-violence. And the same thing was quoted by Mahatma Gandhi also once. that non-violence is a virtue only when it comes from a position of strength. That's a very important lesson for all of us. So sometimes people misunderstand the Bhagavad Gita as a book on war. That's not true, because there is no discussion of war beyond second chapter. Like, you won't find any description, or the word war doesn't come at all. It is all about strength. It is all about managing the mind. It is all about understanding what is right and what is wrong, understanding what is dharma, understanding how to achieve liberation, understanding how to go towards God, how to walk on the right path and reach God. This is what the Bhagavad Gita actually is. The war was pretty much an excuse to convey these messages to all of humanity. Another reason for explaining the Bhagavad Gita in the middle of a battlefield, we discussed this briefly in the introduction as well, is that Arjuna was a common householder. He was a brave and strong warrior, but still, he was a householder. He was not like a sannyasi who is living in the mountains, in a cave. Krishna was also a householder. Krishna was also not a Swami or a sannyasi. So, the context is very relevant to all of us. We are all fighting our own battles in life. So, Krishna wants to set an example and let us know that the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita are meant for householders. It is meant for people who are living normal lives and fighting their battles, everyday battles with their lives. Bhagavad Gita is not some scholarly article that you have to be a scholar and a saint or a sannyasi, a renunciate. You don't need to be that. It's not for those people. I also want to call out this concept of a good dog and a bad dog. So I would like to quote Radhanath Swami's message regarding our mind using the example of a good dog and a bad dog. So Shri Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that there is a divine and a demonic nature in all of us. We have often given the example of the good dog and the bad dog. The good dog is humility, charity, knowledge of the self, compassion, morality, and generosity, and all the good things. The bad dog is greed, lust, envy, anger, arrogance, selfishness, and all such bad things. We have both these dogs within us, and they are both howling for food. Now, what is food? It is the decision we make as to which dog we are going to feed. Which voice within the mind are we going to listen to? And every choice we make is making one dog stronger and the other dog weaker. The dog we feed the most will howl the most. Every time we make an immoral choice, we become more addicted to immorality because the bad dog becomes stronger and the good dog becomes weaker. Every time we make the right choice, we feed the good dog and we make it stronger. In my humble opinion, our goal is to make the good dog very strong and quieten the bad dog totally. This won't happen overnight, of course, and it doesn't have to happen overnight. We just have to do it one decision at a time. Be consistent. And eventually, we will win. The good dog will win. And that should be one of our goals of spiritual evolution. I think with this, we can conclude chapter 1. I'm really grateful to all of you. Thank you again for attending this session. I think I'll stop the recording and open the floor for question and answers. So thank you again. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to me through our private WhatsApp group, or you can also reach out to me through my website, pragmaticgita.com. So see you all again in the next session. Till then, Hare Krishna.